So I will welcome you officially and formally to May. I can't believe we're in May's Second Tuesday webinar. I will talk and read some things for the first half or so, and then I'm going to stop the recording and I'm going to invite you to participate in an activity. That goes with the theme for today, which is nature as phenomenon. And I'll explain in a moment what that means, but I don't want to forget to honor this incredible land I'm on and to say that it was the traditional lands of the Squamish people who reside now across the bridge off this island nearby, but the waters teeming with salmon and the forest rich with resources of all sorts. Not to mention the beauty and the intrinsic value of appreciation for the natural world are still very alive here for many of us, even those of us who don't claim native tradition as our own. What else do I want to say? So I'm a spiritual ecologist. I'll say one funny thing. I think it's funny. I was in a class some years ago, an art class, a bookmaking class at a local place where I do some teaching and take some classes as well. A place called BARN. It stands for Bainbridge Artisan Resource Network. And we had in the class, the teacher offered an invitation for us to introduce ourselves to one another. And so everyone went around, I'm an artist, or I'm this, or I'm that, and I'm here because blah, blah, blah. And I said, I'm a spiritual ecologist and I'm here. And I answered the question. And at the break, this woman lunged toward me, practically knocking me down and said, I have to know, what is a spiritual wakecologist? And I said, wakecologist, like W-A-K-E? And she said, yes. And I said, well, that's interesting. I'm going to have to consider that. So I didn't articulate very well, obviously. So we ended up talking about what is spiritual ecology. And I bring that up partly because the topic today that I'm going to introduce you to comes out of, or is rooted in this notion, this body of work, this body of values, this body of practice that is called spiritual ecology. So we're talking about nature as phenomenon, but I'll try and remember to point out where that fits in with spiritual ecology. I think you guys know I'm a longtime hospice volunteer, and these webinars are simply a way to introduce people in a sort of informal way to some different topics that are relevant to the work I do and tell over stories that are dear to my heart, and hopefully to open up conversation in the second half about how this might be relevant or useful or interesting to either of you. So let me jump in, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a screen share. I'm going to put up a photo that goes with the blog post that I'm going to read, and it's a little bit long, so just bear with me. But I'm going to put up the photo because I want you to be able to see this image while I read the blog with which it's associated. So let me find the right one here. So you guys should be able to see a fourplex photo, yes? Okay, good. So the title of this post from April 23rd is Pear Tree, Junco, Bear. I heard my neighbor's Japanese pear tree calling to me. It called while I worked, gazing out my office window at its new spring finery, white flowers and those soft, soft green leaves. It sang to me as I rocked in the deck chair outside that used to sit on my mama's porch just a few years ago. That pear tree danced in my dream and whispered in my ear as I drove up the driveway and spoke itself alive into my sentences with colleagues, sisters, and friends. It was not just me being drawn to the tree. It was truly the pear tree was calling to me. My sister had written the other day to say how a wave of unconditional love had welled up as she passed some sunlit spruce trees lining the highway she was exiting after work. I felt that unconditional love too for this familiar pear tree in my yard. Something is happening to me in all of this people isolation and social disengagement. A phenomenon, an awakening, a budding or deepening, I'm not sure which, reciprocity with my kin who are of non-human origins. I heard that pear tree call to me louder than the robin's ecstatic spring nest building songs. It was more audible than the 8 swallows' in-flight gurgles and arcing ballet. The pear tree's invitation was engraved in the air, a formality of the most generous sort. I thought that walking around the edge of her low-hanging boughs, taking a few photos to honor, note, and praise her springtime regeneration would be the response she sought. But that was 2 or 3 days ago, and since then, I've continued to hear her call to me, beckoning me to nestle in. So this morning I approached, not knowing exactly what to do, awkward in my sudden intimacy with this pear tree after 4 years of watching her cycle through seasons. I stood just outside the overhead circle of her canopy. She whispered, "Come here." I took a few more barefooted steps through the cool morning grass, and I heard again, "Please come nearer." And then before I realized what was happening, I was standing up against her thick, moss-swaddled trunk, belly to bark. My hands found the rugged grooves that a visiting black bear had etched. With 2 hands pressed up against her wood, fingers sliding deeper into the bear claw message, I just waited there. I hoped for some instruction, or I hoped for nothing at all. As I moved into a meditation, that is, standing there quietly, still, and open, I saw a junco sitting on one of the tree's limbs about 10 feet away. Suddenly, I was alive, engaged in dynamic exchange with bear print, pear tree being, junco foraging. Each time the bird flitted to another branch, he would do a vibrating trill. I watched as the soft sound came out his open beak while his whole little body quivered with the effort. I felt extraordinarily fortunate to be standing where I was, connected to whom I was in those several minutes of pure absorption, pure interconnection, absolute interbeing. Then it came to me. I'm touching tree while tree is being touched by bird. And like a prayer circle with a laying on of hands, I'm now extending a prayer I didn't even know I was uttering. I'm extending a prayer to the Japanese pear tree. I'm extending a prayer to the lovely junco. And a while later, a friend reminded me that I was extending a prayer too to the black bear in whose prints my hands rested. This wasn't just my unconditional love for the tree. I felt loved by tree as well, unconditionally loved. Next time, I won't be waiting so long to meet the request of my other than human family. Next time, I will begin with prayer. Next time won't be a while from now. It will be now and now and now as the present unfolds itself. And so I offer that to you as an entree to this topic of nature as phenomenon, which I really mean to say phenomenology. And I don't know if you've heard of the philosophical body of work called phenomenology, but in short, in clumsy summary, as I understand it, phenomenology is really the abidance with, the connection with something we typically perceive as other, in such close kinship that the boundaries become a little bit blurred. And the subject and object, if I'm the subject and the object is the tree, taking away its animacy for just a minute, and pretending the tree is just an object, that subject-object boundary becomes blurred, and I am changed in the engagement with tree, and tree is changed in its exchange and engagement with me. And so it's really a communion with. That's how I hold the philosophy of phenomenology. So many years ago, decades ago, literally circa the mid-90s, so I was in my 30s or something, I became familiar with a dead French guy named Gaston Bachellard. And I'll read you what they say his bio is, and then I'll tell you what I think his bio is. I have to use my, let me see here. To define him as briefly as possible, he is a philosopher with a professional training in the sciences who devoted most of the second phase of his career to promoting that aspect of human nature which often seems most inimical to science, the poetic imagination. And so Gaston wrote these books. I don't know how, again, how I found him. I used to hang out in bookstores a lot. So I'm a big reader, so maybe that was, I happened upon his books, but I have several of these tomes. I read his bio from the back of this book, The Psychoanalysis of Fire. I also have The Flame of a Candle, The Poetics of Space, Air and Dreams, and there's another one I just heard of today that I'd forgotten about that I'll try and get my hands on. Why I'm so drawn to this man is because he spoke without my realizing at the time as I was reading his work about, and it's a little bit cognitive, it's a little bit heady. I was just opening it this morning to find a few little quotations that I could pull out to share with you. And I was thinking, wow, I sort of have a hard time imagining who I was 30 years ago reading this stuff, but I did, I devoured it. And I have proof because the dog-eared pages actually have like coffee marks and highlighters and pen marks and notations. So apparently I read them very thoroughly, and I've carried them around, though I've offloaded books in many, many moves over the years. I'm collecting a lot more, sadly, again these days, but I held on to these 4 books knowing that there was something important in them. And so now I've begun to reread them in recent weeks. But he really speaks to me about that phenomenon, that kind of inexplicable thing that happens for me when I'm engaged with the natural world. Anybody in the natural world. It might be the pear tree. It might be the deer, big, huge female deer. I couldn't believe how large she was. And we're not, you know, deer are not unfamiliar in our yard. They're not strangers to our area. But there was one particularly large gal with whom I was in interaction last week as I stood on my deck quietly trying not to scare her away, trying to get some very up close photos of her face with my good camera. And she was munching on some very tall grass on the other side of a little pasture area. And I can't explain to you what that engagement is when I'm looking into the eye of a coyote or a deer, or feeling the swallows darting around my head as they do their arcing ballet, as I have come to call it, building their nests right now and tending to the eggs that are no doubt in those nests in the eaves around this place where I live. But I think it captures phenomenology, that moment of pure engagement with the other, to the point that the other almost dissolves, and it's not me and it or me and them, it's just what is in this moment. It, to me, really captures the beauty and the awe and the reverence of what it can mean to really get close to the natural world. Also, though, Gaston Bachellard talks about phenomenology in regard to all kinds of things, like flames on a candle. So let me just read a couple of quick a few lines here and there. The flame illustrates every form of transcendence. By the way, I happen to be a fire person. I mean, maybe actually my zodiac sign, Sagittarius, might be a fire sign. I'm not really sure, and I don't know much about that stuff, but I do know that I love having candles and light and lighting incense, burning incense and burning other kinds of anything, actually. I just think there's something so compelling about that dancing flame. And so imagine my love as I read about somebody who's trying to express the inexpressible, which is this engagement. How is it we can stare at a flame on a candle or a fire in a fireplace or a campfire and be so amazed, so entranced, so enchanted by the fluid, dynamic, ever-shifting nature of that flame. And there was one other little thing I wanted to read of his before I moved to somebody else. Contemplating a flame, and you can insert instead of the word flame anything with which you might be captivated in a moment. Contemplating a flame perpetuates a primordial reverie. It separates us from the world and enlarges our world as dreamers. In itself, the flame is a major presence, but being close to it makes us dream of far away, too far away. One loses oneself in reveries. The flame is there, feeble and tiny, struggling to stay in existence, and the dreamer goes on to dream of elsewhere, losing his own being by dreaming on a too grand scale, by dreaming of the world. The flame is a world for the solitary man. I would add to that woman or person. Also, what I will do now is just quickly and briefly introduce you to, and Lisa, you may be familiar with this guy, David Abram. I'm not sure if he defines himself as a phenomenologist, but he wrote a book years ago that became very popular in particular circles, especially in earth-loving people circles, called The Spell of the Sensuous. And he really talks about the intimacy of nature. He's also written other books since then. I have one I'm going to pick up at my local bookstore today, something maybe called The Body of an Animal or The Human Body or something anyway. Our animal bodies, something of that sort. And I actually got to hear him. I've heard him speak before many years ago, decades ago, actually, when I was studying his work the first time. And I'm just finishing up a class this week, in fact, that I've been taking, and he was our speaker for the first session. And so here are a couple of just snippets of things he said that help capture this essence of what it means to consider the world of nature alive. I mean, I think most of us would agree in some cognitive sense, the trees are alive and birds flying through the air are alive and insects are alive. When we start talking about rocks, some people might start getting confused about whether a rock is alive or not. David Abram, in his work, is really talking about using our senses, all of them, including senses we don't particularly define, like intuition, maybe, to really engage with the more than, what he calls the more than human world. And so he says, here's one quotation: perception is a kind of communication, a style of reciprocity. He also said that his work is assumption, it holds the assumption that everything is at least potentially alive and everything moves just at different paces and different rhythms. And so, for example, looking at that rock in the yard, it looks like it's still, but perhaps it is actually just moving at a pace that I can't discern with my senses. So I'm bringing those things in because this experience of actually engaging the natural world deeply without words, without perhaps other people present, but just to slow down and to get quiet and to see what happens, to just open ourselves, can be an incredible experience. I've been researching this in a whole bunch of ways for many, many years, both formally through academic and scholarly pursuits, and sort of informally every day as I work with clients and provide experiences where people could go out in natural landscapes and take a story or a question or intention with them and just experience what happens on a quiet solo walk with no food and no company and no shelter for 20 minutes or 4 hours, whatever. Some of us have done vision quests, and so we have that experience over a period of days, but to just let the natural world, to just be in engagement with it, sometimes holding that light intention can help us focus a little bit. And what I often tell clients when I send them out is just have this experience, just see what you see, be open, remember that you have ears, and remember that you have eyes, and remember that you have a nose that will smell things. And if you feel brave, taste a few things too, touch things, put your hands on things that you might not normally touch, and then come back and tell me the story. And in that telling of their story, then I mirror that back, and we sometimes can find some gems that help them move forward in their life, to step into something more deeply or differently, or with more clarity and insight. So recently I have been deepening my experience of the natural world in a phenomenological sense, starting to capitalize sometimes, like in that blog post, sometimes when I use the word tree or junco, I actually capitalized it where our language might normally, in proper English, whether it's England English, British English, or American English, we might not capitalize, making into a proper pronoun those words. I've begun to do that. I've begun to assign a gender, or if not a gender, a sense of genderless personhood. I don't mean personhood like humanity, but assigning an aliveness, a wisdom, a knowing to the beings around me, to think of them as beings rather than that tree or that slug or that bud on the bush over there, and really exploring how that feels, because we don't have good words in English. We had a long discussion about this in one of my classes. We don't have words for, and also if you're familiar with Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass and maybe some other things. If you're not familiar with her work, I highly encourage you to look her up. She also talks about this, that we don't have good words in English for the beingness of the non-human world. We don't have pronouns that work. We don't have pronouns for humans that work either, if we're thinking about genderless pronouns. So it becomes really confusing to even begin to verbalize, even when I use the word nature, which I don't feel as a thing separate from me. But I don't have a way yet. I've been exploring this for a long, long time, writing about this, talking about this for a long, long time, and I still don't have a good foolproof way of talking about the natural world, the living world, the more than human world around me, in a way that really feels satisfying and true to what that experience is. So in the same breath that I'm trying to explain to you what is nature as phenomenon, what is phenomenology, what is spiritual ecology, which holds as one of its core values this notion of reciprocity with the natural world. So not just I'm watering a tree, or I'm planting something, or I'm receiving beauty from, or taking a photo of, but that there's a giving back too. There's an offering that I might give, but there's also something that the being with whom I'm engaging might receive as well. So I've begun exploring that as I shamelessly kissed a tree the other day, not planning to. I'm not sure I've ever done that before, but I actually kissed the bark of this tree that has become very dear to me over the last year, and whom I hadn't seen for a little while. after hugging it, after leaning my head against it, pressing my forehead, sitting at the base of him. I am giving him, the tree, a male pronoun for some reason. I kissed this tree, and I don't know how to really explain why I did that or what it was for me, but it was a genuine moment of just wanting somehow, talking to the tree. I almost sang to the tree, but there were a lot of people on the trail, and I didn't want to offend too many people with my off-key voice. But just to have those engagements, we don't have a lot of words for that, but I have been exploring it in a lot of ways after years of doing sort of the academic and scholarly research about it. And here are a few things I've learned. I've learned that abidance asks us to be quiet, both verbally and mentally. So consequently, my exploration of the more than human world in a phenomenological way recently has also required me to do a lot more meditation, sitting quietly, watching thoughts pass by, maybe in some moments trying to empty my mind, especially if I'm feeling disturbed about things. Another thing I've learned, we can practice a phenomenological approach. It's not just some cognitive, philosophical construct. It can be a practical way of engaging life. And I just want to put a side note in here and say I've been talking a lot about visual. I'm very visual, so I've been talking a lot about that. But listening, the way I've been listening to bird song, the way I taste a particular something on my tongue as I'm eating dinner. I was cutting strawberries the other day. I don't know why, but I have a thing for strawberries in recent years, and they have to be part of my salad pretty much every night, even though in some seasons they're not very fresh up here in the Pacific Northwest. They're not very sweet, though we are coming into the season soon, and I'm excited. But I get them, and I buy them, and they're not local, and I'm embarrassed about that a little bit. But anyway, I eat these strawberries. So I was cutting one. It might have been as recently as last night. And normally I cut them, they go in the bowl, and then they become part of this savory, sweet, yummy salad that I eat most nights. However, last night I popped a little bit in my mouth, just a fragment. And I didn't mean to be phenomenological. I didn't mean to be having a moment where I was stopped in my tracks, but I was stopped in my tracks by the taste. I wasn't cutting my salad and putting it together anymore. I was simply having a moment of this sweetness hitting my tongue. I'd had some tea a little while before, some ginger tea, and I don't know if there was some interaction between the ginger that was left in my mouth and the strawberry, but it was just this exquisite moment of being aware, being thoughtless. So it can happen also with all of our senses. And then the third thing I've learned is that we are changed, transformed, inspired, informed by searching for the animism in nature. And I dare say nature is transformed too. So here are 3 takeaways, and I'm going to turn off the recording and guide you, if you two are willing, through a little phenomenological practice. Here are 3 takeaways. We are continually shaped by our engagement with beings in nature. I might say that every single time we have these webinars, but I just can't say it enough. And I think that it goes really unexplored, largely in our mainstream culture. So it's a constant encouragement to all of us to practice this engagement. We can practice losing the distinctions that serve to separate. We can practice nurturing the commonalities that serve to bind and reintegrate our sense of connection to nature. And I would also say our connection to others, human others that we perceive really as other, as different from us. And thirdly, we can also apply these ideas more broadly in our relations to other humans, other faith traditions, other cultures, other kinds of practices, etc., etc.